This content is for educational and informational purposes only and is not intended as medical, legal, or regulatory advice. Peptides discussed are often sold for research use only, and regulations vary by country. Always follow applicable laws and consult qualified professionals before making decisions related to health or business. Today we're diving into something that has been quietly but significantly shaping the peptide space, and that is the recent increase in border seizures of peptide shipments. If you've been paying attention, you may have noticed longer shipping times, higher prices, or even certain compounds becoming harder to find. There's a reason for that, and it's not random. There's a shift happening, and understanding it gives you a major advantage whether you're a researcher, a consumer, or someone building a business in this space. Let's start with what's actually happening. Border seizures refer to when customs and regulatory agencies intercept and confiscate shipments entering a country. In the United States, this is typically handled by agencies like Customs and Border Protection and the Food and Drug Administration. Over the past year, there has been a noticeable increase in scrutiny on incoming shipments labeled as peptides, research chemicals, or even vaguely described biological compounds. This isn't happening in a vacuum. There are a few driving forces behind it. First, peptides have exploded in popularity. What used to be a niche research category has become mainstream. You're seeing them discussed in podcasts, on social media, in fitness communities, and even in clinical settings. That kind of visibility brings attention, and attention brings regulation. Second, there's concern from regulators about safety, labeling accuracy, and misuse. Many peptides are not approved for human use, yet they're widely marketed and used outside of strictly controlled research environments. From a regulatory standpoint, that creates risk, and one way to address risk is to tighten control at entry points. So what does that look like in real life? It means more packages being flagged. It means more inspections. It means shipments being delayed, tested, or outright seized. And when that happens consistently, it starts to ripple through the entire supply chain. Now, let's talk about availability. When shipments are seized, supply decreases. That's basic economics. But it's not just about volume, it's about consistency. Even if a supplier has product, if they can't reliably get it through customs, their effective supply becomes unstable. That leads to back orders, out-of-stock notices, and longer wait times. You may have already seen this with certain peptides becoming harder to source. Compounds that were once readily available suddenly disappear for weeks or months. Then they come back at a higher price, or from different suppliers. That inconsistency is a direct result of disruption at the border level. And that leads us straight into pricing. When supply becomes constrained and demand stays the same or increases, prices go up. That's exactly what we're seeing. Suppliers are factoring in higher risk. If a percentage of shipments are being seized, that loss has to be absorbed somewhere. Often, it gets built into the pricing structure. It's not just the cost of the product itself. There are additional layers now. Shipping routes may change. Suppliers might use more complex logistics to reduce risk, which increases cost. There may be more quality testing, more documentation, and more overhead. All of that contributes to higher end prices. There's also a shift in where products are being sourced. Historically, a large portion of peptides have been manufactured overseas and shipped directly to consumers or resellers. With increased border scrutiny, some suppliers are moving toward domestic warehousing. That means bringing larger quantities into the country at once, clearing them through customs, and then distributing locally. That approach can stabilize availability, but it also changes the cost structure. Upfront investment is higher. Storage, handling, and compliance costs increase. Again, those costs don't disappear, they get passed down the chain. Another important factor is supplier reliability. In a low enforcement environment, almost anyone can enter the market. But when enforcement increases, weaker suppliers get filtered out. They can't maintain consistent supply, they can't navigate regulatory pressure, and they eventually disappear. What you're left with is a more consolidated market. Fewer suppliers, but often more established ones. That can be a good thing in terms of quality and consistency, but it also reduces competition, which can contribute to higher pricing. Now let's talk about quality, because this is where things get interesting. When pressure increases, there are typically two responses. Some suppliers improve. They tighten their processes, improve documentation, and aim for higher legitimacy. Others go the opposite direction and cut corners to maintain margins. This creates a wider gap between high-quality and low-quality products. For the end user, that means you have to be more selective. Just because something is available doesn't mean it's the same as what you were getting before. Batch consistency, purity, and labeling accuracy become even more important. Another layer to consider is substitution. When certain peptides become harder to obtain, people start looking for alternatives. That can drive demand for similar compounds, which then puts pressure on those supply chains as well. It's a domino effect. You may also see more innovation in formulation and delivery. Suppliers might focus on blends, modified peptides, or alternative compounds that are less scrutinized. That doesn't necessarily mean better or worse. It just means the landscape is evolving. From a business perspective, especially if you're in the peptide or cosmetic space, this is a moment where strategy matters. Inventory planning becomes critical. Relying on just-in-time ordering can be risky when supply chains are unstable. Building relationships with reliable suppliers becomes more valuable than ever. It's also a time to think about positioning. If prices are rising across the board, customers will be more selective about where they spend. Trust, transparency, and consistency become key differentiators. People are willing to pay more, but only if they feel confident in what they're getting. There's also the regulatory side. Increased seizures often signal a broader shift toward tighter oversight. That doesn't happen overnight, but it builds. Staying ahead of compliance, understanding labeling requirements, and maintaining clear boundaries around how products are marketed becomes increasingly important. For consumers, the impact is a mix of frustration and opportunity. Yes, prices may be higher and availability less consistent. But there's also a chance to become more informed, more selective, and more intentional about what you're using. It's worth noting that not all peptides are affected equally. Some are more heavily scrutinized than others. Factors like how they're labeled, how they're packaged, and how they're described in documentation can influence whether a shipment gets flagged. Shipping methods also play a role. Certain routes, carriers, or entry points may have higher inspection rates. Suppliers who understand this can adapt, but again, adaptation usually comes with increased cost. Another interesting angle is timing. When seizures increase, there's often a lag before the market fully adjusts. During that window, you may see sudden shortages followed by price spikes. Over time, the market tends to stabilize, but often at a new baseline. So the big question is, where is this heading? While no one can predict with certainty, the trend suggests continued scrutiny rather than a return to the old environment. Peptides are on the radar now, and once something is on the radar, it rarely goes back to being ignored. That doesn't mean the space disappears. It evolves. It matures. It becomes more structured. That can actually be a positive long-term, even if it creates short-term challenges. If you zoom out, what we're really seeing is a transition phase. The peptide market is moving from a loosely regulated, niche environment into something more mainstream and more controlled. That transition always comes with friction. For those paying attention, this is also where opportunities are created. Understanding supply dynamics, building strong sourcing strategies, and focusing on quality can set you apart in a crowded and changing market. Before we wrap up, it's important to remember that peptides exist at the intersection of science, regulation, and consumer demand. Changes in one area inevitably affect the others. Border seizures are just one piece of the puzzle, but right now, they're a very visible and impactful one. This content is for educational and informational purposes only and is not intended as medical, legal, or regulatory advice. Always ensure you are operating within applicable laws and consult qualified professionals when needed. Thanks for listening, keep learning, and stay curious.